Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of EUD TV. In 2025, EUD decided to change the format of our informative webinars into a brand new program, EUD TV, where we will be focusing on EUD's work. This first episode will focus on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, shortly the UNCRPD, and this at both levels. First of all, at the European level, with the review of the EU's report on the implementation of the UNCRPD, undertaken by the Committee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where also a new deaf expert from Japan has been appointed, Mr. Hiroshi Tamon. And second of all, at the national level, with the training we are providing to our NADs on the UNCRPD and how it is useful for their advocacy work at the national level. So, in this first episode of EUD TV, you will discover how the EU review was like in Geneva in Switzerland. You will also watch our interview with Mr. Hiroshi Tamon. And you will learn from our NADs in Sweden, Austria, and Germany about their experiences with our CRPD training. So, first of all, let's discover what the CRPD means for deaf people and why EUD is working on the review of its implementation in the European Union. To do so, we will ask for insights from our EUD policy team, composed of Alexandre Bloks, Policy Manager, and Delphine Lemaire, Policy Officer. Delphine, can you explain us why the review of the EU's report on the UNCRPD is important for the European deaf community? Please, the floor is yours, Delphine.
Thank you. The European Union ratified the UNCRPD on the 23rd of December 2010. The CRPD is the first human rights treaty to officially mention the rights of deaf people and their right to sign language. After 2 years, the EU had to submit an initial report explaining their work in implementing the convention since the ratification. The CRPD committee reviewed the report in 2015 and made several recommendations to the EU. The most important ones for deaf people were to enforce the implementation of its legislation on access to information and communication to make sure information from the EU member states is accessible in sign language, and to promote the recognition of sign language. Also, the information on the websites of the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the EU institutions needed to be accessible in sign languages, as recommended by the CRPD committee.
That's right, exactly. And we also know that a few years later, the European Union issued the European Disability Strategy on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, also the European Accessibility Act, or EAA, and the Web Accessibility Directive. However, there is a lot of work to do, especially on the recognition of the national sign languages at the EU level.
Yes, EUD highlighted the issues regarding the recognition of sign languages in a submission to the CRPD committee in 2022. Normally, the EU should produce a report every 4 years. However, due to the COVID pandemic, instead of doing 2 distinct reports, it did 1 report, combining the 2. After this report, the CRPD committee addressed a list of issues, which are specific questions to the EU on their report. Within these questions was the question on what measures were taken to facilitate the accessibility of information in sign language. The EU replied that there is increasing information in international sign on their website and that they obliged the EU member states to enforce media service providers to make their services more accessible in sign language. But this is not enough.
Thank you so much, Delphine, for your insights. Now, let's discover how the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities conducted its review on the European Union's report. Our policy manager, Alexandre Bloks, attended the review in Geneva in Switzerland, and he will show us how it went and what the CRPD committee members think of it.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm here in the United Nations in Geneva. The EUD are here with two clear goals that we would like to achieve. Our first objective is for the 29 EU national sign languages to become official EU languages. Our second is to ensure that the 112 emergency number is made accessible in sign language, which is not currently possible. These two priorities have guided us in the numerous meetings that we've been involved with members of the CRPD committee. These topics have been part of the official agenda and discussed in individual meetings with members who are aware of our priorities, as they had previously received briefing documents outlining our demands. Over the next 2 days, there will be an official meeting between the EU Commission and the CRPD Committee. The CRPD Committee will engage in dialogue with the EU on their actions. We held a briefing with the CRPD Committee member, Mr. Hiroshi Taemon, on our priorities, which further informed his questions to the EU Commission. We will then wait for the CRPD Commission to release their concluding observations. The concluding observations are recommendations made by the committee to the EU on the next priorities to implement the CRPD in the course of the next 5 years. We sincerely hope that sign language rights will feature within these concluding observations and that the EU Commission will then best implement this priority. Thank you. Now back to Sophia in the studio.
Wow, thank you so much, Alexandre, for your interesting report from Geneva, Switzerland. EUD is very proud to see that our work in the review process has impacted the outcomes of the dialogue between the CRPD committee and the European Union. Now, what may we expect next, Delphine?
The CRPD committee will now prepare the concluding observations that are recommendations on the next steps to implement the CRPD by the EU during the next 4 years. EUD will definitely follow up on the recommendations and ensure the EU comply with it on the rights of deaf people and national sign languages. After those 4 years, the EU will need to present a new report showing it implemented the recommendations made in 2025.
We have exciting work ahead in the upcoming 4 years, and it aligns with the first mandate of a new deaf expert from Japan who has been appointed, Mr. Hiroshi Taemon. Let's learn about his work in the CRPD committee through an interview Alexandre had with him in Geneva.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm here with someone very important, and I'll let him introduce himself. My name is Hiroshi, and this is my sign name. I'm from Japan, and in June 2024, I became a member of the CRPD committee, which is when I began my work on the committee. It's a very important role, and I would like to know, before becoming a member of the committee, what was your education and life experience that led you to taking on this important position? I am deaf. I was born and raised in Japan, and for 26 years I worked as a lawyer in Japan, representing persons with disabilities, defending their human rights. An example of my work during this time was representing persons with disabilities who previously underwent forced sterilisation in Japan. Working with other lawyers, we brought this case to court. Following a lengthy battle, the judge decided for the government to award compensation to persons with disabilities who underwent forced sterilisation. This led me to undertake a lot of cases of human rights violations. In 2023, I put myself forward as a candidate for the CRPD committee. During my election campaign, I met representatives from different state parties, which eventually resulted in my election to the committee. This is a very interesting life story. I would like to know what inspired you to strive to become a member of the CRPD committee. What was your motivation behind this? There were three main reasons that motivated me to become a member of the committee. The first of these was that my experience of legally representing the many deaf people who went through forced sterilisation, witnessing the oppression and suffering that they went through, and succeeding in these cases. Unfortunately, there are examples of forced sterilisation in several countries around the world, and I would like to continue my work fighting for these causes. My second reason was regarding emergency situations. Japan has suffered repeatedly from earthquakes and flooding. I'm willing to tackle this issue of supporting persons with disabilities in emergency situations at the global level. As a member of the committee, I can examine how emergency responses and preparedness are managed around the world. My third reason was deaf representation within the CRPD committee. There have been 2 occasions of deaf representation in the committee over the period of 4 years. Following their term, there was no deaf representation in the committee. Therefore, I wanted to put myself forward for election as a deaf person. As you mentioned in the past, there were 2 deaf representatives who each served 2 years on the committee. However, this time you will serve the full 4-year term. Congratulations on this. I would like to know, for deaf organisations who would like to come to Geneva for the review of their countries by the CRPD committee, what's the best way to be in touch with you? Is it through the WFD EUD directly reaching out to you? Thank you for your question. For the global deaf community, they can contact me through the WFD Human Rights Expert Group. Secondly, they can do so through the ICSD Legal Commission. Thirdly, I can be contacted directly through my email address if you have it. Around the world, there are many examples of deaf people being oppressed. Not all countries have officially recognised their national sign language. There are plenty of cases of this happening to various degrees. If a state party officially recognises their national sign language but does nothing to implement these rights, Deaf people can contact me about these situations. The important thing is, when state parties come to Geneva to be reviewed by the committee, that the National Association of the Deaf come as part of the National Delegation of Organisations of Persons with Disabilities. This way I can be briefed directly by the NAD, which can assist. So the most important thing is that the organisations of deaf people come to Geneva. Earlier you said representatives of the National Associations of the Deaf could come to Geneva when their countries are under review. Can you explain a little bit more about your work as part of the committee and what a typical day looks like for you? The UN official schedule begins with a morning session from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. and an afternoon session which begins at 3 p.m. and finishes at 6 p.m. and an afternoon session which begins at 3 p.m. and finishes at 6 p.m. Interpretation in international sign is provided. If I'm posing questions to the state party, I use international sign. However, if I'm finding it difficult to express myself in international sign language, I feel more comfortable using American Sign Language instead and asking the interpreting team to do the same during the official sessions. However, there is a problem when it comes to times outside of the official UN schedule, for example in the morning from 8 a.m. till 10 a.m. or between 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It often happens that there are important meetings that I need to have, and there are no sign language interpreters available for this. Instead, I bring two of my own personal assistants that are ASL interpreters. To support communication during these unofficial times within the UN schedule. The UN pay for one personal assistant, which is much less in comparison to the interpreting fee. The Japanese Federation of the Deaf, JFD, provide fundamental support by contributing additional funding to cover the associated costs. The UN should bear the responsibility for these costs. They have the spending ability and should provide the funds to ensure accessibility. It is important that deaf people within the UN are provided with access. The CRPD committee is recommending state parties to the CRPD to ensure this, but they are not applying these principles themselves, which is not normal. This issue must move forward. The EUD is supporting you, just like the WFD have supported you so far, as it's important for us all to stay united in ensuring that this moves forwards. Now, the interview must come to an end. I want to say a big thank you to you, Mr. Hiroshi Taemon, for giving up your time today to take part in this interview, which will be available soon. Now it's time to go back to Sophia in the studio.
Thank you, Alexandre, for that really inspiring discussion you had together with Mr. Taemon. So before we move on, I want to briefly highlight EUD's role in supporting the implementation of the UN CRPD across Europe. We really empower our national associations of the deaf by providing training to strengthen their advocacy and engagement with the CRPD review process. These trainings ensure deaf voices are heard in shaping policies that truly affect our lives. So, up next, we'll hear from some of our NADs in Sweden, Austria, and Germany about how these sessions have impacted their work. Let's take a look. Overall, the support we received was really beneficial to us. We gained the confidence and the awareness on the significant role we could play in Geneva. We became assertive and we proactively worked on it. After developing convincing argumentation, we submitted our request to attend the session of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Fully equipped with the tools we received, we both attended the session. The focus of our participation was to address the lack of access of deaf people to sign language interpretation in the employment area. In the past, there have been instances where deaf people were not provided sign language interpretation at work, even when they asked for it. We wanted the Swedish government to be questioned on why they did not undertake any measure on this issue. We have been advocating for many years for a change, but the authorities have not taken into account our demands, despite a research report on this issue and our research evidence. When the question had been addressed in the session, we felt the Swedish representatives were quite evasive in their responses. The committee denounced the lack of provision of sign language interpreters to deaf people in employment as a violation of their rights. It urged the government to change this unacceptable situation. As we felt the committee's support in our endeavors, we now continue to advocate for that. We are really happy to see that our work impacted different NADs in Sweden, Austria, and Germany, and that it has strengthened their advocacy work at the national level through the United Nations. We are also hoping that more NADs will think to ask EUD for support, to really put the right of deaf people to sign language in the middle of the disability movement. So, Delphine, what are the next EU countries that are under review by the CRPD committee, and what will EUD do exactly?
The CRPD committee will review the implementation of the UN CRPD by Finland in August 2025. Also for Iceland, Ireland, Latvia and Luxembourg, they will issue a list of issues in September 2025. We have already informed our national associations of the deaf in these countries and will provide the training on the CRPD review process, but deeper and more technical. However, we're also ready to provide the training to any national association of the deaf regarding how to use the CRPD to achieve our rights at the national level, regardless of the timeline of the review. Are you interested? Do not hesitate to contact us.
Well, in this episode, we have explained to you what our role is in the review of the European Union by the CRPD committee, and also why it is important for the European deaf community. We have also highlighted our mission in supporting our members to implement the CRPD at their own national level. This is some of the work that we are doing and what we can do to support all of you. We truly encourage you, our national associations of the deaf, to stay engaged and to stay focused on the CRPD updates in your own countries. As you all know, EUD is here to support you. We are here to guide you towards the implementation of the CRPD so that we all can have the full realization of our human rights to sign language. Until then, we kindly invite you to follow our activities on our different social media platforms and to also take a look on our EUD website for more updates. For now, thank you so much for watching this first episode, and we will see you in the next one. Bye bye.